Pokemon is a great game, traveling through different regions, meeting new characters, and facing new challenges. But some things have always stayed the same, and those were the Pokemon, what types they are, and for the most part, the moves they learn. Thankfully, almost a decade ago, Pokemon Insurgents popularized the idea of regional variants. Versions of Pokemon that look and feel completely different, but still resemble their original forms. And ever since then, we've seen tons and tons of projects popping up that either have a focus on regional forms, or just include them as an extra feature. So today, I'll be showcasing 5 Pokemon ROM-hacks that I believe do the best job of incorporating regional variants into their game. My name is Ari, and let's get right into the hacks. Let's start off strong with a hack that takes over 400 species of Pokemon and give them a brand new set of types, moves, and even names. This is Pokemon Altered, and you might be thinking, but if the name is changed, doesn't that just make it an entirely new Pokemon? Well, yes and no, because like I said before, nearly everything has been changed. But I will admit, all the Pokemon I encountered definitely resembled their canon counterparts, either in the name, shape of their sprite, or some extra details that may or may not take some time to fully grasp. But figuring out what each form was originally supposed to be definitely added to the fun. But outside the visual appeal of the regionals, each form was unique and fun to use in battle, with access to tons of different moves and abilities from up to the 8th generation. And other than the abnormal number of, well, normal types, the type diversity across the region was pretty good. Speaking of the region, while the game does take place in Kanto, using the same graphics as Fire Red and Leaf Green, there were some changes to the maps, and some new ones that make the gameplay a bit more enjoyable. But one somewhat negative thing I do have to say about the hack is that the level curve is kind of terrible up until the first gym, and I found myself having to use rare candies to get my team of 6 up to par. But luckily, that issue went away shortly afterwards. And while Altered isn't necessarily a very challenging game, there is a separate version that increases the difficulty, adds some new starters, and even adds a handful of new maps and challenges to truly allow you to unleash the full potential of the game's incredible regional forms. But overall, it's a very fun hack if you're a fan of Fakemon or regional variants. Next up, we have a hack of much similar nature that also takes over 400 Pokemon and gives them new regional forms. This is Pokemon Fool's Gold, a hack of Pokemon Crystal where everything is familiar, but also different. Starting with the regional forms, while the number of them is similar to Altered, the execution is a lot different, where Pokemon still mostly resemble their base counterparts. I will say that even with the artistic limitations of the Gen 2 games, the designs definitely did deliver. But something that the game definitely lacks compared to Altered and other games on this list is variety. I didn't feel like I was given too many options for team building in the early game, especially with how some types are still really bad in this version of Johto. And most Pokemon were pretty limited to the number and types of moves they can learn, as if the developers were trying to mimic the balance of Generation 2 and 3 a bit too hard. But with enough team building skills, that's a problem that didn't impact the gameplay too much. And that lack of early game variety might have to do with the game having 3 regions. That's right, alongside Johto and Kanto are the Sevi Islands, which are filled with regional forms of Pokemon from the Hoenn region. As for quality of life features, they aren't too insane here, but we at least have the physical special split, infinite TMs, the removal of trait evolutions, and even some aesthetic changes to the overworld. And while the hack does lack the EXP all, I never really felt underleveled, even while I was picking up new team members at a much lower level. Despite the shift in gameplay that throwing a bunch of regional forms in a game with different types introduces, one thing that always stays the same are the types themselves. You're always going to have the fire type, water type, and so on. But what if you didn't? What if you took all 18 types and replaced them with 18 new ones? That's exactly what the ROM-hack Weird Type Fun does. But of course, alongside these new types, has to come exactly what this video is about: different forms of Pokemon, 400 of them to be exact. Each one with of course new types, new moves, and a new design. Now I will immediately say that the best thing about this hack are the sprites. The regional forms are so incredibly well made, and the artists did an amazing job making sure they match the new types. But speaking of the new types, they were a bit weird, because instead of having something like normal, rock, and ghost types, you'd have beast, gem, and chaos types. And that's just scratching the surface. I'll admit, trying to get used to them, and even understand the logic of the type matchups, felt like a chore at times. But I guess that's just a part of the whole experience. One thing about this hack that did disappoint me though, was the almost entirely faithful Gen 3 Kanto experience. I don't blame the developer for not wanting to switch up too much with all the new types and forms, but I feel like there are just way too many hacks nowadays that don't make any changes to the region or its visual appeal. It's getting to the point where a project will genuinely feel unplayable if I walk outside and see the same pallet town for the 100th time. Even if everything else in the hack is amazing, it just feels so unmotivating to play when the entire region looks almost completely the same. Which is why I'm very happy to bring you the next hack, one that doesn't take place in an existing region, one that recently became my favorite of all time, and one that I've probably talked about way too often. But in my defense, Pokemon Odyssey fits right into this video, with 70 new regional forms. And while these regionals are incredibly unique and fun to use, you might be judging the fact of how little there is, compared to the previous 3 hacks in this video. So it is 100% worth mentioning that alongside these regional forms, also comes a dex of around 350 canon Pokemon, that have all received completely revamped learn sets, some new abilities, and even access to their Hisuian counterparts. But as I mentioned before, Odyssey also comes with a completely new story and region, if you can even call it that, because while the world you have access to is mostly composed of small islands, 95% of the main story takes place in the Yggdrasil Labyrinth, a gigantic maze made up of 8 different stratums, all of which have their own unique biomes, treasures, people, and Pokemon. And if it couldn't get any better, Odyssey even comes with a plethora of quality of life features, including the EXP All, EV Editor, and 3 different difficulty options, so you can enjoy the game no matter what your skill level is. So go ahead and jump right into Pokemon Odyssey, or wait for its completed release coming this year. And last but not least is a hack called Platinum Redux. Now the biggest question most people have to hacks of Pokemon Platinum is how does it differentiate itself from Renegade Platinum, a project that's arguably the most polished Gen 4 ROM hack. First of all, to be in this video, it of course has a variety of different regional forms. But all of the canon Pokemon have also received various changes to their move pools and abilities. And while the second part sounds very similar to Renegade Platinum's changes, I'll admit that this hack goes to a much more extreme extent with their changes. With over 400 either new or changed moves, and some questionable but interesting changes to some Pokemon typings. And if it couldn't get any better, there are even a handful of Pokemon from the 5th through 9th generations available to capture. Additionally, Platinum Redux comes with a plethora of quality of life features, unique to the Gen 4 hacking scene, including the Pokevile, portable PC, a free mover learner in said portable PC, and so much more. And while Platinum Redux is a difficulty hack, the removal of EVs made the playthrough a lot less grindy. Platinum Redux is definitely a fun experience, if you want to replay through the Sinnoh region with a ton of interesting twists. But that's just about going to wrap up this video. I hope you found at least one new ROM hack to play, and if you didn't, then be sure to check out the tons of other projects I showcased on my channel. Make sure you subscribe to keep up with the latest Pokemon ROM hacks, and of course, have a nice rest of your day.